The S&P 500 just turned away the most valuable companies on the planet, and the reason might shock you. SpaceX, OpenAI, and Anthropic, three companies collectively worth over $1 trillion, were blocked from fast-tracking their way into America's most prestigious stock index. Not because they are too small, not because they are not influential enough, because they don't make enough profit. Here's why that's jaw-dropping. The S&P 500 is supposed to represent the 500 most important companies in the American economy. Right now, the companies arguably reshaping artificial intelligence, space exploration, and human civilization, they don't qualify under rules written decades before any of this existed. The S&P 500 Index Committee made its position crystal clear this week. They won't waive the profitability requirement for any company. No matter how famous, how well-funded, or how world-changing. That rule states a company must post positive earnings in its most recent quarter and across the 4 most recent consecutive quarters combined. SpaceX reportedly met several criteria, but not that one. OpenAI is burning through cash at a staggering rate. Anthropic is in exactly the same boat. Think of the S&P 500 as the VIP section of an elite members club with an ironclad dress code. You can be the most talked-about person in the country, but if you're not wearing the right shoes, you're not getting in. These AI and space giants showed up in sneakers to a black-tie dinner. And this is where things get surprising. To understand why this matters so much, you need to know what the S&P 500 actually does in the real world. It's not just a list of 500 famous companies. It's the financial engine powering the retirement savings of tens of millions of ordinary people. When you put money into a pension fund, a 401k, or a simple index fund, a huge chunk of that money automatically flows into every single company on the S&P 500. Proportional to their size, there's roughly $7 trillion tied to funds that track this index. That means when a company gets added, institutional investors, pension managers, university endowments, exchange-traded funds are effectively obligated to buy its shares immediately. The demand is instant, enormous, and guaranteed. Being added to the S&P 500 isn't just a status symbol. It's a financial rocket launch. The index has been around since 1957, built by Standard & Poor's, now S&P Global. The original goal was simple: create a benchmark reflecting the health of the American economy by tracking its 500 largest, most stable, and most profitable publicly traded companies. That phrase, publicly traded, is where the first hurdle already appears. SpaceX is currently a private company. OpenAI is still completing a complex restructuring from a non-profit into a for-profit model. Anthropic hasn't announced any public listing plans whatsoever. So before these companies can even knock on the S&P 500's door, structural barriers are already stacked up. The profitability rule is just one layer of a deeper challenge. But here's what most coverage gets wrong. The profitability requirement turns out to be the hardest wall to climb. The S&P 500's profitability rule sounds straightforward enough, but it has real teeth. A company must show positive GAAP earnings, that stands for Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, the standardized method of measuring actual profit, not the flattering adjusted numbers tech companies love to publish in their press releases, in its most recent quarter. And it must show cumulative positive GAAP earnings across its 4 most recent quarters combined. That's a meaningful threshold, especially for companies burning through capital to fund hypergrowth. OpenAI reportedly spent around $7 billion more than it earned last year. That number alone illustrates the scale of the gap. Anthropic is spending at a comparable rate, propped up by massive investment rounds from Amazon and Google. SpaceX sits in a more complicated position. It generates genuine revenue from Starlink subscriptions and government launch contracts, but the staggering cost of developing Starship and expanding its rocket fleet keeps GAAP profitability elusive. Think of it this way. Imagine the world's most exclusive gym has one strict membership condition. You have to demonstrate your personal finances are healthy enough to sustain a long-term commitment without defaulting. These companies are like incredibly talented athletes who have maxed out their credit cards training for the Olympics. Impressive, without question. Financially stable by the GIM's definition? Not yet. The committee reportedly considered whether to grant a one-time waiver for companies deemed strategically critical to the American economy. They declined. Their message was unmistakable. Rules protect ordinary investors from exposure to speculative companies that might never turn a sustainable profit. Here's the twist nobody expected. SpaceX came closer to qualifying than most of the headlines suggest. SpaceX reportedly met several of the S&P 500's criteria when the committee reviewed its situation. It's a large and genuinely growing company. It generates real, recurring revenue. Starlink, SpaceX's satellite internet service, has grown to over 4 million subscribers globally, producing consistent and expanding cash flow. Elon Musk has publicly described Starlink as the financial backbone that makes the rest of SpaceX's ambitions sustainable. But nearly that doesn't count. On a strict GAAP basis, SpaceX's four-quarter cumulative earnings still didn't cross the threshold. 1 quarter of outsized Starship development expenditure appears to have been the deciding factor, 1 quarter that flipped an otherwise borderline case into a clear rejection. Compare that with Tesla's journey. When Tesla joined the S&P 500 in December 2020, it was the largest company ever added to the index in a single move, valued at around $650 billion at the time. Tesla had only recently started posting consistent quarterly profits after years of losses. Its inclusion was controversial. Some analysts argued it had been kept out far too long. But when it was finally added, every box on the checklist was ticked. OpenAI faces a different challenge entirely. It doesn't have a publicly listed stock. Its transition from a non-profit structure into a capped profit corporation is still underway. Anthropic is majority funded by Amazon and Google, two investors who are in no hurry to push Anthropic toward a rushed public listing before it's ready. The part most people overlook entirely, this committee decision doesn't just affect these 3 companies. It sets the rules of engagement for the entire next wave of AI firms seeking public legitimacy. Here's a comparison that puts this in sharp relief. Amazon didn't run a consistently profitable business for many years. Jeff Bezos famously reinvested every dollar of revenue back into growth, new warehouses, new services, relentless expansion. And yet Amazon remained in the S&P 500 throughout much of that era. Because it was publicly traded, it had sufficient market capitalization, and it managed enough profitable quarters to stay technically eligible. The rules bent, but they didn't break. Nvidia tells a more striking story. In early 2023, Nvidia was worth around $300 billion, a large company, but not extraordinary. By mid-2025, it had surged past $3 trillion, becoming one of the most valuable companies in history. The chip behind that explosion, the H100 GPU, powers the very AI models that OpenAI and Anthropic are building. Nvidia was already inside the S&P 500 for that entire ride. An OpenAI that had listed and reached profitability 3 years earlier could theoretically have been along for the same surge. There's also the Uber comparison. Uber went public in 2019 and lost money for years. It only joined the S&P 500 in 2023, after demonstrating sustained profitability. That multi-year wait cost early investors the automatic institutional buying that floods into a stock on inclusion day. Microsoft has poured around $13 billion into OpenAI. Those investors are watching every earnings cycle very closely. A future S&P 500 inclusion could trigger a capital influx, unlike anything OpenAI has experienced. And this is where it gets complicated, because the committee's decision isn't purely about accounting. It's about the values built into the index itself. What the S&P 500 committee said, quietly, between the lines, is that the index's rules aren't just accounting formalities. They're a statement about what kind of companies belong in a benchmark that ordinary people's retirement savings depend on. Speculative companies, no matter how exciting or famous, carry higher risk. The S&P 500 was designed to measure stability and proven performance, not to serve as a vehicle for venture capital-style bets on unproven future growth. This matters enormously for retail investors. When a company isn't in the index, The trillions of dollars managed by passive funds simply don't flow into it. Ordinary people have to actively seek it out. Most won't. For companies like OpenAI, being excluded means a massive pool of institutional capital stays permanently on the sidelines. The broader implication touches the AI investment bubble directly. OpenAI is currently valued at around $300 billion in private markets. Anthropic sits at roughly $61 billion. These are extraordinary figures for companies losing money at scale. The committee's refusal is a reminder, and perhaps a warning, that private market valuations and public market standards operate by completely different logic. Not every highly valued private company ever achieves the sustained profitability that public investors eventually demand. There's a governance dimension too. S&P 500 membership forces a level of scrutiny these AI labs currently avoid: quarterly earnings calls, activist shareholders, deep analyst coverage, and hard questions about long-term unit economics. These companies have operated with relative freedom. Joining the index would change that picture fundamentally. Here's what the headlines aren't telling you: the AI industry's complicated relationship with profit is about to become impossible to ignore. So what does this mean for anyone paying attention to the AI space from an investment angle? The first thing to understand is that the S&P 500 is a lagging signal, not a leading one. By the time a company gets added, much of the early explosive growth has already happened. Tesla was worth $650 billion when it joined. Nvidia was already a giant. The inclusion event matters, but it's not the moment the smart money typically moves. For SpaceX, the most important signal to track is Starlink revenue growth. Starlink has been adding subscribers at a meaningful pace, and recurring subscription revenue is exactly the kind of predictable cash flow that GAAP accounting rewards. If Starlink keeps scaling and regulatory approvals in new markets continue arriving, SpaceX could realistically hit the profitability threshold within a few years. Assuming Starship development costs begin to level off, OpenAI's path is harder. Training frontier AI models costs hundreds of millions of dollars per run. That's a structural cost that doesn't shrink easily. OpenAI's revenue from API access and ChatGPT subscriptions is growing rapidly, but whether growth consistently outpaces those extraordinary compute bills is not yet obvious. Anthropic has taken a different route, partnering deeply with cloud infrastructure providers rather than building everything in-house. It's a deliberately lower burn strategy. Whether that eventually yields sustainable profitability is still an open question. The practical takeaway is this: track earnings trajectory, not just headline valuations. The S&P 500 doesn't care how famous a company is. It cares whether the company can consistently pay its own way. But wait, there's something nobody's talking about yet. Here's what this means for you, watching the AI industry move in real time. The S&P 500's decision isn't a death sentence for SpaceX, OpenAI, or Anthropic. It's a recalibration of expectations. For years, the story around these companies has been almost mythological, transformative, unstoppable, inevitable. The committee's ruling is a quiet but firm reminder that the financial world operates on a completely different timeline than the hype cycle does. What to watch for next? SpaceX's Starlink financials will be the most telling signal. If the satellite internet business achieves the consistent GAAP profitability Musk has been promising, and if SpaceX ultimately decides to list publicly, an S&P 500 application could arrive within 2 to 3 years. That would be a genuine market event, triggering automatic purchases by every major index fund on the planet. OpenAI's corporate restructuring is the other critical thread to follow. The company's transition from a non-profit into a for-profit public benefit corporation is still ongoing. An initial public offering could follow, and if OpenAI reaches profitability before broader market sentiment turns skeptical on AI company valuations, a significant if the S&P 500 door could open faster than most analysts currently expect. The deeper story here isn't really about rejection. It's about what legitimately counts as success in the technology industry. Being valued at hundreds of billions of dollars isn't the same thing as building a sustainably profitable business. The companies that figure out how to do both, create transformative technology, and run a healthy balance sheet, are the ones that will truly shape the next decade. Follow for daily AI news, because this story is only getting started.